So general operating funds, right? General operating funds are awesome. Unrestricted funds are really awesome. I think of them as like the Tyrion Lannister of Game of Thrones, right? Or the Daryl Dixon of The Walking Dead. Or the Sophia from the Golden Girls, right? So they're flexible, they're adaptable, they help us to get things done, right? And it's gotten really ridiculous, the restrictions that funders have been placing on nonprofits, right? I used to direct, I was the ED of a youth development organization, and we had after-school programs. And one day I came into the room, I came into the office, and one of my staff was just almost in tears. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Well, it's this grants, this grant that we have. It won't pay for tutors' planning time. It will pay for their teaching time, but not their planning time. And it won't pay for food, so we had to find food from somewhere else. So we have one grant that won't pay for food, one grant that won't pay for payroll taxes. We have a grant that pays for supplies, but it won't pay for, I don't know, easel papers." It was ridiculous. You know, and I said, "Well, why don't you just increase the tutors' pay? Because if we're not going to pay for their planning time, then we should just increase their pay, right?" And she said, "No, it capped it at $14. We can't pay more than that, this grant." And I thought, this is ridiculous. Funders don't pay for 100% of anything, right? So what we do is we have to Frankenstein a bunch of grants together to support grants, and they each have their own restrictions. And it's very, very frustrating. And I went to lunch with a corporate foundation person, and we're having a great lunch. He was a really nice guy. And he said, "You know, what you're doing is really great. You should consider applying for a grant that we have." And I said, "Yeah, I looked at your website. It looks like a really great grant. And I want to ask you, do you have any tips for how to make a competitive application?" And he says, "Well, don't put in a line item for staffing, because we hate paying for staffing." And I looked him in the eye.
That's all we need.
Right? So I looked him in the eye and I said, "Who do you think is going to run these programs? Elves? Unicorns?" Right. All right, I didn't actually say that. Because he's a funder, right? And I wanted him to pay for lunch that day. Right. But this is the sort of ridiculousness that we have to endure. I like to think of it, you know, I like to ask funders to think about what it would be like if businesses had to run with the same restrictions that we nonprofits run, right? So imagine if you and I are running a bakery. Let's call it the Dusty Apron Gluten-Free Bakery. I'm from Seattle. We have a lot of gluten-free bakeries, right? And a customer comes in and says, "Hey, you guys make gluten-free cakes. Can I order a gluten-free cake?" And we say, "Yeah, we specialize in this." And they say, "Well, how much would it cost for a chocolate cake that will serve like 100 gluten-free veterans?" And we say, "It'll cost about $100 for this cake." And the customer says, "Well, I can only give you $20. We'd never pay for the full cake. Just $20. You had to find like 5 other people to pay for the rest of the cake." And I say, "Oh, all right, sure. We'll talk to some other customers and we'll Frankenstein some funding together to pay for this cake for the gluten-free veterans." And the customer says, "Well, great. Well, here's $20, but you can't spend it on butter. You can only spend it on eggs, and I don't want you to spend it on chocolate, all right? And I don't want to pay for electricity for your oven either." So then we agree to that. So a week later, they come by and they're like, "What's wrong? This cake is really dense, and it's not buttery enough. What's wrong with that?" And we said, "Well, we have like 5 other customers, and they each have their own set of restrictions. Some won't pay for, and our oven broke down, and no one would pay to fix it because it's indirect. It doesn't benefit gluten-free veterans." Right? So then they're like, "Well, you guys don't have any capacity to bake, so we're never going to order a cake from you guys again." So meanwhile, someone else is like, another customer is standing by, and they're like, "Oh, wow. That's too bad because I ordered a cake from you last month and it was delicious. Like I and 5 other people ordered a cake from you guys and it was delicious. And I said, well, thank you for ordering that cake. Would you like to order another cake? And they're like, oh, hell no. We only order cake from each bakery one time because we order cakes from you all the time. You're going to become dependent on us, and that's just madness. Madness, I tell you. So that's what it's like for us, right? So we know how ridiculous that is. And luckily, we have a few funders who also understand that. But unfortunately, we ourselves have internalized this message, and so we tend to undermine our own arguments, right? So even the best of us, even the most well-intentioned of us, have projected this disdain of general operating funds and administrative expenses. So there's some things that we have to do. We cannot expect people to respect and support general operating if we ourselves display a disdain of it. So here's what we need to do, right? One, we have to stop saying 100% of your funds go to programming. This usually happens at an annual dinner, right?
Right.
And we do the raise the paddle, and someone will go up and do the ask, and they'll say, guess what, 100% of your funds go to programs. And why do we say this? This is terrible, right? Because this just reinforces people's perception that that program expenses are great, and everything else is terrible. It's like funding, I don't know, terrorism or paying for rocks to throw at the elderly or something. So we need to stop doing that. So whenever you see someone doing that, you need to go and tell them, just stop saying that. Or raise your paddle and say, I want to support, rent and admin fees, right? So that's one thing we need to stop doing. Right. I want to support the development director, salary, Two, we have some funders who are really great. They're allies of ours, and they understand the importance of multi-year general operating funds. But they are rare, and they're seen as this kid, on the playground whose family does not own a TV or something, And other kids make fun of them. And they're like, ha, Timmy's family plays board games and talk to one another during dinner. What a bunch of weirdos. They're seen as that crazy family, And so we have to support them, but we don't recognize them. They tend to fund the things that no one considers sexy, and so they are left out of the limelight. We never recognize them. We never, at the annual dinner, we never say, hey, we want to recognize our general operating funds, funders, who are paying for our rent, who are paying for this event, et cetera. We have to start recognizing them because they are the ones who have a much better chance of convincing their peers than we do because of the funding dynamics, right? So we have to recognize them more often and more vocally. 3, we have to stop artificially deflating the number that we spend on admin fees, right? Because every year we break this down and it's like programming and fundraising and admin, and we try to use calculus and algebra and arcane magic to get this number to be lowered down. And some organization, I'm like, you only spend like 5% on admin? Are you insane? Like, first of all, there's no standardized way to calculate admin fees. So all of us are just making stuff up, really. The numbers are meaningless. They're meaningless. But the more time that we spend trying to lower them, our field as a whole loses because we're trying to compete each other to lower these numbers. We need to stop it. Right? We should be proud of the fact that we're having strong infrastructure to support our services, right? And the third thing, the fourth thing, we need to stop, I don't know, I have issues with the terminologies that we use, right? Either we need to claim them, admin fees, admin expenses, indirect, they all sound crappy, right? So either we really claim them or we need to change them into something and use terms like critical infrastructure or core support. Or things that we need to do our job, damn it. So we'll just change to that. We'll just have an acronym. Things we need in order to do our job, make the world better, damn it. Right? That's what we need to call it. We need to put in a line item in our budget for reserve funds. Because people always talk about sustainability, but then they don't fund like the reserves that we have in there, and they get annoyed at us because we have some reserves in, for when we can't Frankenstein things together, and our programs need funding to keep being sustained. So put that in there. We also need to, hold on. I have all these down here because they're really important. Right. The watchdog organizations like Charity Watch and Charity Navigator and Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance, all right, we need to just stop trying to seek their approvals. Why are we doing this? There's no standardized ways for them to calculate. They don't have a good way to calculate how effective our organizations are. So what they're doing is like, okay, how much are they spending on programming? It's ridiculous. I know they release a letter debunking this overhead myth, which I think is a good start. But still, it's not enough. Organizations are still seeking their approval, and it's a waste of time. And last night, because my room is haunted, I stayed up researching the Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance. And apparently, you can get a seal for your website, right? You get this little seal, and you just put it on your website. They'll say, oh, you are certified to be whatever, a good nonprofit. And you have to pay $1,000 to $30,000 on a sliding scale to have this little seal on your website. And I find that to be really ironic. It's like, yeah, let's pay $10,000 to get a little seal that says that we're using money wisely. Right. So we need to stop that. Just stop. We don't need to seek these people's approvals. All right, we know we're doing kick-ass jobs. We need to seek their approval. And the last point is we really have to push back, and we have to take risks, and we have to push back against funders who are restricting our grants. I mean, like it's ridiculous. And because of the funding dynamics, and because of the fact that we are so invested in our clients, that oftentimes we'll just take the brunt of the burden, and we don't push back, and we need to. And maybe that might cost us a couple of funders. But I think it's better for our field that we do that more often, right? Funders have to understand that when we have no restrictions on our funding, then we can focus on baking better cakes and baking more cakes, right? So we need to get them to really understand that, right? We can't just, we have been going to happy hours, all the EDs, we go to happy hours and we complain about stuff to one another, and we grumble about the restrictions, and we get frustrated at these restrictions, and we get annoyed and insulted that people think that we'll just run amok and buy gold-plated business cards, studded with Swarovski crystals. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know that those crystals will just scratch up our smartphone, so we're not going to do that. Right? But we have to stop grumbling among each other, and we really have to start focusing and being more organized and delivering a better message about unrestricted funding. Because at the end of it, we have to think about these gluten-free veterans. They always get fruit for dessert. And no one should have to eat fruit for dessert. Thank you.